You ever feel the wind get knocked out of you not by a punch, but by a phone call? Not even a loud one. Just a casual, Sunday afternoon kind of ring that changes everything. That's how I found out about my sister's wedding. A wedding I wasn't invited to. A wedding that had already happened. I was fixing the hinges on Mom's back porch door when my cousin Rachel called. That's already strange, because Rachel and I hadn't talked in months. Not out of bad blood or anything, just life doing what life does. People drift. But when I answered and she asked if I was still in town after the wedding, my hands froze on the screwdriver. I asked her what wedding. And she went silent. Long enough for the cicadas in Mom's backyard to start sounding like sirens in my ears. She tried to recover, something about how she just assumed I was there, how she thought it was a small ceremony anyway, how weird it was that I didn't know. I let her ramble for a few seconds before I hung up without a word. Not out of rudeness, but because I needed a second. Needed to breathe. Because my little sister, Samantha, my only sibling, had gotten married. And nobody told me. And I was standing in our childhood backyard like some old piece of furniture left behind in the move. Now, before you get the wrong idea, Samantha and I weren't estranged. We weren't best friends either, but we had history. Shared secrets. 1,000 inside jokes that only made sense if you were raised under the same leaky roof by the same tired parents. Last I talked to her, maybe 6 months ago, she was still figuring things out with her boyfriend, Kyle. She'd said nothing serious was happening. Guess that changed. I went inside, hands still greasy from the porch work, and found Mom sitting at the kitchen table with her tea. I asked her, straight out, if Samantha had gotten married. She didn't even flinch. She set her cup down real gentle and said, yes. Like she was confirming the weather. I waited for more. An explanation, a smile, maybe even a tear. But she just looked at me, calm as ever, and said, it was better this way. Fewer eyes. Less mess. Less mess. That's what she called it. Me. A mess. She told me Samantha wanted something small. No drama. No fuss. She said they'd only invited a few people, just close friends and necessary family. Necessary. You ever hear a word so sharp it cuts clean through you? I wasn't necessary. So I asked, real quiet, if I was the one who made it messy. If I was the problem. And Mom, bless her, didn't even try to soften it. She said Samantha didn't want to deal with bold tensions on her wedding day. Said it would have made things uncomfortable. That word, uncomfortable, it's always been a cloak for the truth. For shame. For decisions made in shadows. Here's the thing. I wasn't perfect growing up. Samantha and I butted heads, like any siblings. I got into trouble more, sure. Drifted from the family more after Dad passed. But I never stopped being her brother. Never stopped caring. Never stopped showing up when it counted. Birthdays. Hospital visits. Even drove 4 hours once when she got in a fender bender and didn't want Mom to find out. But I guess none of that made me necessary. I didn't say much after that. Just nodded, walked back outside, and finished fixing the porch door like it was any other Sunday. But something in me felt cracked, like that hinge I just replaced was holding something a lot heavier than a door. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in my old bedroom staring at the same ceiling I used to dream under as a kid. Only now, the dreams felt like they belonged to someone else. A different version of me. One who still had a seat at the table. And as I lay there in the quiet, one question kept playing in my head like a broken record. When did I become the person it was easier to leave out? Sleep never came that night. I just lay there in that old creaky bed, the one with the dip in the middle that pulls you in like a trap, staring up at the popcorn ceiling and thinking about the last real conversation I had with Samantha. It was on her birthday. She'd turned 28. I remember because I sent her this goofy card with a picture of a llama in a party hat, and she actually called to laugh about it. We talked for a good 45 minutes. She told me Kyle was working late, that she was tired of people asking when they were getting married, and how she felt like she still didn't have her life figured out. I told her no one ever really does. She said, "You always know what to say," and I held on to that like a compliment from a world that had started handing me less and less. That was 6 months ago. Now I was standing in the past, in a house where I used to matter, and everything felt rearranged. Photos I didn't recognize sat on shelves where Dad's old stuff used to be. The dining room was painted a different color, the fridge was covered in grandkid drawings from Rachel's kids, but none from me, because I don't have any. Another unspoken strike, maybe. I thought about confronting Samantha. Really did. But the thing about finding out someone kept you in the dark is, once the lights are off, there's no good way to navigate back in without bumping into everything. So I did something else. I got in my truck the next morning and drove to the hardware store in town. Bought a plain gift bag, a card, and a bottle of mid-shelf champagne. The kind that says, "I remembered, but I didn't celebrate." I wrote 3 words in the card. "Heard you married." Then I drove to Kyle's place, the one Samantha had been living in, and left it on the doorstep. No knock. No note. Just the bag sitting there like a ghost at the door. On the way back, I passed the church on Elm Street. Big white place, red trim, always looked like a postcard. Sure enough, there were still petals on the ground. A few ribbons blowing in the wind, tied to a wooden arch that hadn't been taken down yet. That was where they did it. I was sure of it. Samantha always liked that church. She used to say it looked like where people got married in movies. So I pulled over. Sat on the curb. Just watched. Funny thing is, I wasn't even mad. Not really. Just tired. Like I'd been running in a race I didn't realize I wasn't invited to. You start thinking you're part of something, and one day you find out they've been making plans without you. That's what hurt. Not missing the ceremony. Missing the truth. I headed back to Mom's that evening. She was in the kitchen again, reheating leftovers like nothing had changed. When I walked in, she gave me that small smile she always used when she wanted to pretend things were normal. She asked if I'd like some chicken. I told her no, thanks. I was just passing through. She nodded, didn't push. That's her way. But then, as I reached for the door, she said something low. Not soft, just low, like she didn't want to hear herself say it. "She didn't want you to come, John." I stopped. She said she didn't want the attention to shift. That you always make things about you. Now that got me. Because if there's one thing I never did, it was steal her spotlight. Hell, I spent most of our childhood shining a flashlight so she could find her own. I didn't turn around. Just stood there, hand on the doorknob, letting her words echo around the room like an empty bowl. "She's wrong," I said, finally. And left. The drive back to my place was long. Not in miles, just in memory. I thought about the school plays I went to. The night she lost her job and cried on my couch for 2 hours. The time I paid her car insurance when she was broke but too proud to ask Mom. Thought about how none of that made it onto the guest list. And somewhere between the silence and the streetlights, I realized something simple but hard. Sometimes people rewrite the story to feel better about who they left out. And sometimes the best thing you can do, is stop trying to get back in. You know, there's a peculiar silence that follows a revelation like that. It doesn't roar or sting like a fresh wound, it hums. Like white noise in the back of your mind while you go through the motions of life. That hum followed me everywhere for days. Back at my place, I tried to settle in, but everything felt louder somehow. The creak of the floorboards. The buzz of the fridge. Even the birds outside sounded like they were gossiping about me. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not Jacob, not Lindsay, not even my buddy Rob, who always had something to say about everything. I didn't want opinions. I didn't want people telling me how they would have reacted. I wanted the truth to sit with me, just me, for a little while. About a week later, I got a text from Samantha. Not a call. Not a knock on the door. A text. Hey, John. I hope you're doing okay. I heard you stopped by. Sorry you found out that way. That was it. No, I'm sorry you weren't there. No explanation. Just, sorry you found out that way. It landed like a stone in my chest. I didn't answer right away. I left it there. Read. Unread. Marked. Unmarked. You ever stare at a message so long it loses meaning? Like the words unravel and all that's left is the feeling behind them. But I did respond. Eventually. Congratulations. I hope it was everything you wanted. That's all I said. Not because I wanted to be petty, but because I didn't have anything else to give her. My well was dry. Later that night, Rob swung by unannounced with a six-pack and a pizza. He didn't even wait to be invited in. Just plopped down on my recliner like he always used to before life got too complicated for spontaneous company. He asked what was up, and I finally told him the whole thing. From Rachel's accidental call to Mom's casual confession to Samantha's half-hearted apology. He didn't say much at first. Just listened. Took a long sip from his bottle and nodded like he was chewing on something bitter. Then he said something I won't forget. Man, sometimes the people closest to you don't want you at the table because your presence reminds them of what they've chosen to forget. I didn't understand it at first. But the more I sat with it, the clearer it became. Samantha didn't want me there because I held history. I held a version of our childhood, of our dad, of herself, that maybe she didn't want resurfacing on the best day of her life. Maybe I reminded her of a time she's trying to bury. Of a past she's repainting with softer edges. And maybe Mom went along with it because, well, Mom's always gone along with it. Later that week, I found myself driving past the old park where Samantha and I used to go as kids. Swings still squeaked the same. Some new graffiti on the benches, but otherwise, it hadn't changed much. I sat on that bench for a long while. Let the wind carry the noise of the world past me. Watched a young dad push his daughter on the swing while she screamed with joy, her little fists punching the sky. That's when it hit me. I could spend the rest of my life asking why I wasn't invited. I could hold that pain like a keepsake, polish it, let it define me. Or I could let it be what it was. A choice. Their choice. And I get to make mine too. I stood up, dusted the bench off like I'd been leaving something behind, and drove home. That night, I pulled out an old photo of Samantha and me from when we were kids, Halloween, I think. I was a pirate, she was a fairy princess. We were smiling like we had the whole world ahead of us. I slipped that photo into a drawer. Not out of bitterness. Out of love. But love doesn't always mean return trips. Sometimes it means knowing when to stop knocking. I didn't talk to Samantha again after that text. Not for a while. Not because I was holding a grudge, though I'd be lying if I said the sting didn't linger, but because I needed room to figure out who I was without the old family roles tagging along behind me. The reliable brother. The backup plan. The one you call when your tire's flat but not when you're saying vows. That guy. He was tired. Life has a funny way of handing you clarity when you're not asking for it. I started doing more of the things I used to push off. Picked up guitar again. Joined a local pickup basketball group that met Saturday mornings at the Y, started going to the diner on Thursdays where old Mr. Carmichael still read the paper and gave unsolicited advice about everything from fishing to forgiveness. And through all that, something strange happened. I stopped waiting for an apology that might never come. One evening, a few months later, I was leaving the grocery store when I saw her, Samantha. She was coming out of the pharmacy next door, hair pulled back, a tote bag slung over her shoulder. She looked surprised to see me, but not guilty. Just unsure. Like someone bumping into a memory that hadn't settled yet. She waved. I nodded. Then she walked over. We made small talk, about work, the weather, the heat wave coming next week. Nothing big. But there was this space between us. Not tension, exactly. More like, a respectful silence. An unspoken, we both know what's not being said. Then she asked if I had time for coffee. Said she'd like to talk, really talk. So we sat at a little place down the road. Ordered our drinks. She got chamomile tea, like she always did when we were kids, and pretended it made her wise. And then she told me. She said it hadn't been easy planning the wedding. That she and Kyle had eloped the first time, on a whim, because they were tired of all the pressure. Said Mom convinced them to do a second, official, ceremony, and somewhere in that mess, I got left out. Not forgotten. Left out. She said she didn't know how to include me without it being complicated. That word again. I asked her what was so complicated about inviting her own brother. She looked down into her tea and said something I wasn't ready for. Because you remind me of Dad. And that day, I just wanted to feel light. And you know what? It didn't even hurt. Because I finally understood. Sometimes we become stand-ins for pain people haven't dealt with yet. Mirrors they're not ready to look into. And instead of owning that, they label us drama, or baggage, or too much. But it's not about us. It never was. I told her I got it. That I wished she had told me sooner, sure. But I understood. She nodded. Said she was sorry. Really sorry. And it felt real. I told her I forgave her. And I did. Not for her sake, but mine. Because forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about reopening the door. It's about being able to walk past it without stopping. We didn't hug when we left. Just a quiet, take care, and a soft smile. But it was enough. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Because there's peace in knowing you showed up with love, even if no one asked you to. There's freedom in stepping back without bitterness. And there's grace in realizing not every story needs a dramatic ending. Sometimes, just closing the chapter is enough. After that coffee with Samantha, things didn't snap back to the way they were, and I didn't expect them to. We weren't suddenly calling each other every Sunday or trading memes like we were teenagers again. But something in the air between us had changed. The ache was quieter now. And I started realizing, maybe that's all I ever needed. Not an invitation, not even closure, just truth. Clean, unvarnished truth, however painful. It clears the fog in a way silence never could. Funny how that works, huh? Life didn't slow down after that. It never does. But my pace through it started to feel more steady. I got back to some things I'd forgotten mattered. Picked up a side project building furniture out of reclaimed wood, something I'd always wanted to try but never made time for. Turned my garage into a little workshop. Smelled like cedar and coffee for days. And let me tell you, there's something deeply satisfying about turning broken scraps into something solid again. There's a metaphor in there, if you want to find it. I reconnected with a few people too, old friends I'd let drift. Even ran into Miss Carla, our old neighbor who used to make oatmeal cookies that could stop a war. She hugged me like I was still 10 years old and told me she was proud of me. I hadn't heard those words in a long time. Not like that. Not without a catch. You learn, in moments like that, who your real people are. They're not always family by blood, but by consistency. By how they show up. By how they see you. That's what rebuilding really is, finding your people again. And more importantly, finding yourself again. And Mom? Well, she called a couple weeks after the coffee with Samantha. Said she was making stew and asked if I wanted to come by. It took me a while to answer. Not out of spite, just weariness. Because when someone chooses silence over support, even once, you start watching every word with caution. But I went. Not for her. For me. We sat across the table, the smell of thyme and bay leaf filling the kitchen like old times. She ladled me a bowl, then sat down and just looked at me for a minute. She didn't apologize, not directly. But she said, "It wasn't right, John. What we did. What I let happen. I don't know why I thought you'd be fine with it. I just wanted peace." And I told her, softly, that leaving someone out isn't peace, it's avoidance dressed up in a pretty coat. She didn't argue. Just nodded, and for once, looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. We talked for a while. Not about everything, not about Samantha's wedding, but about Dad. About childhood. About the cracks we covered with politeness for too long. And when I left that night, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. But I did feel lighter. See, healing isn't loud. It's not fireworks or grand gestures. It's slow. It's Sunday dinners where the conversation doesn't sting. It's walking past the church on Elm Street and not feeling like you've been erased. It's rebuilding, not the house you lost, but the one you never knew you could have. Inside you. Brick by brick. It's been a year since that phone call on the porch. The one that cracked something open in me. A year since I found out my sister got married through someone else's voice, not hers. Since I stood in the hallway of the house I grew up in, realizing I wasn't necessary. That word still lingers sometimes, like a stubborn splinter. But you know what? Over time, even splinters work their way out if you stop picking at them. Samantha and I talk occasionally now. She sends pictures sometimes, of the dog they adopted, of the house they're remodeling, of the life she's building. And I smile. Genuinely. Because I want her to be happy. I always did. We're not close like we used to be. But there's warmth there. Mutual respect. And that might just be enough. Mom's gotten quieter too. Not just in volume, but in spirit. Less insistent on pretending things are fine, more willing to let the hard truths sit at the table with us. Sometimes, that's all healing needs, room at the table. This past Thanksgiving, she asked if I'd come early to help her prep. Said she'd like to make Dad stuffing the way he used to. That was new. She even pulled out the old photo albums, the ones that used to gather dust in the attic like forgotten testaments. We sat on the couch flipping through them. She laughed at a picture of Samantha and her crooked tiara, and then paused at one of me, maybe 8 years old, missing 2 front teeth, grinning like I owned the world. She ran her fingers across the page, real gentle. "You always had a good heart," she said. It caught me off guard. Sometimes, the smallest acknowledgments feel like apologies dressed in better clothes. I looked around that living room, the same one where I used to fall asleep during holiday movies, where Dad used to leave his boots by the fire, where Samantha and I once built blanket forts taller than ourselves, and I realized something. I wasn't trying to get back in anymore. Because I never really left. They just stopped seeing me for a while. And now I see myself. That's the real arrival. Not the one where they invite you back in, but the one where you stop needing the invitation. Where you stand taller in your own life. Where you love them without folding yourself in half to fit their comfort. You stop begging for a seat at their table, because you finally built your own. And when they visit, if they visit, you'll make room. Not out of obligation. Out of strength. That's where I am now. Not bitter. Not broken. Just, grounded. If you've ever found yourself left out of a chapter you thought you were part of, let me tell you this. You're not alone. And you're not unworthy. Sometimes, people leave you out because they don't know how to face the fullness of who you are. But that's not your fault. And it sure as hell doesn't define your story. Write your own pages. Hang your own photos. Build a life so honest and good it hums with quiet pride. That's what I'm doing. And if my phone rings tomorrow with an invite or an apology, I'll answer it with grace. But if it doesn't, I'll still be okay. Because the healing already happened.